Welcome to Nocturnal Nightmares TV. We trust the flashing blue and red lights, the calm voice over the radio, the shield on their chest. We see them as bastions of safety in the dark. But what happens when they are the ones who are alone? When the darkness they patrol begins to stare back? Tonight, we ride along on 5 of the most terrifying, allegedly true encounters ever experienced by police officers on solo patrol. These are the calls that dispatch can't prepare you for, the moments where the badge offers no protection. We begin with a routine call to a quiet suburban street, a call that was anything but Story 1. The static caller on Stillwater Lane. The call came in at 2:17 a.m., the deadest hour of the graveyard shift. Dispatcher's voice, usually a steady, calming drone, had a slight tremor. Unit 34, respond to a 911 domestic disturbance at 112 Stillwater Lane. Female caller sounds distraught. Line is open, but she's no longer speaking. It sounded routine. Tragic, but routine. Stillwater Lane was at the edge of my patrol zone. A newish development that had died on the vine, leaving a handful of occupied houses surrounded by empty lots and skeletal frames of unfinished homes. It was a place that always felt like it was holding its breath. As I turned my cruiser onto the street, my headlights cut through the thick, soupy fog, illuminating a single house at the very end of a cul-de-sac. 112. All the lights were off. That was the first red flag. In a heated domestic, the house is usually lit up like a Christmas tree. I parked a few houses down and approached on foot, my hand resting on the butt of my service weapon. The silence was absolute. No shouting, no crying, no sounds of a struggle. Just the soft crunch of my boots on the pavement and the distant hum of the highway. The house itself was a 2-story colonial, neat and tidy, with a perfectly manicured lawn that looked almost black in the moonlight. The front door was slightly ajar. Red flag number 2, Sheriff's Department, I announced, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. Is everything all right in there? No response. I pushed the door open. The air that flowed out was cold and sterile, like a morgue. But my flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a living room that looked like it was staged for a magazine. The furniture was immaculate, the pillows perfectly fluffed. Not a single thing was out of place. There was no sign of a disturbance, no hint of violence. The only thing wrong was a single old-fashioned rotary phone lying on its side on a small end table, the receiver dangling a few inches from the floor. From it, a faint, rhythmic static hissed into the silent room. This had to be the source of the 911 call. "Ma'am," I called out, stepping inside. "Sir, this is the Sheriff's Department." A woman appeared at the top of the stairs. She was silhouetted against the darkness of the upper floor, a tall, slender figure in a simple nightgown. "He's upstairs," she said, her voice a flat, emotionless monotone. "He gets loud." There was no fear in her voice, no anger, no distress. Just a profound, chilling emptiness. She didn't move, just stood there, watching me. I felt a cold dread begin to seep into my bones. The entire scene was wrong. A fractured diorama of a domestic call. "Ma'am," "I need you to come down here so we can talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's in the bedroom." "At the end of the hall," she repeated, as if I hadn't spoken. "You should go see him." My training screamed at me to get her out of the house, to wait for backup. But the woman was impassive, and the situation, while deeply unsettling, had no visible threat. I had to clear the house. "Stay right there, ma'am," I ordered, and began to ascend the stairs, my light held high, my heart hammering against my ribs. The upstairs was as sterile as the ground floor. 3 doors led off the hallway. 2 were closed. The one at the very end was open, spilling a deeper darkness into the hall. The air grew colder with every step I took, my breath pluming in front of my face. The woman remained at the top of the stairs, a silent statue. I reached the open door and swept my light inside. It was a master bedroom, as immaculate as the rest of the house. A large bed, perfectly made, a dresser with nothing on it. The closet door was closed. The room was empty. There was no one here. A wave of confusion and anger washed over me. What kind of sick game was this? I turned back to the woman. "Ma'am, there's no one here. I need you too." She was gone. The top of the stairs was empty. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 34. The house at 112 is clear. Female party is no longer on scene. Can you confirm the source of that 911 call? Did you hear a voice?" The reply from dispatch sealed my fate. -34. We never heard a voice. The call was pure static from an open line. Sounded almost like crying if you listened long enough. And 34, be advised, our system shows that property has been vacant for 3 years. The previous family, they just disappeared one night. The house is owned by the bank. My blood turned to ice. As I processed her words, I heard a sound that made my heart stop. A soft, definitive click from downstairs. The sound of the front door closing and the deadbolt sliding home. I was trapped. I spun around, weapon drawn, and sprinted down the stairs. The front door was locked tight. I threw my shoulder against it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to set in, hot and suffocating. Then the static started. It wasn't just coming from the phone anymore. It was coming from everywhere. From the vents in the floor, from the walls, from the empty rooms upstairs. A low, hissing chorus that grew in volume, filling the house with its deafening, electronic shriek. And then it began to form words. It was a mimicry, a grotesque playback of my own voice, twisted and layered. Dispatch, this is Unit 34. The static rasped, the words crackling with malevolent energy. The house is clear. I realized the horrifying truth. The house itself was the entity, the 911 call, the static that sounded like crying, the spectral woman. It was all a lure, a carefully constructed trap to get someone inside. It had been listening, learning, and now it was toying with me. I backed away from the door, my flashlight beam dancing wildly around the pristine, perfect room. The shadows in the corners seemed to be deepening, stretching, coalescing. The static voice spoke again. this time mimicking the dispatcher. Negative 34. The house is owned by the bank. It was a nightmare given form. I smashed a window with the butt of my flashlight and scrambled out, cutting myself on the jagged glass. I didn't stop running until I reached my cruiser, my breath coming in ragged, terrified sobs. I looked back at the house. It was dark, silent, and still, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew what it was. It was a predator wearing the skin of a house, using our own technology as its bait. I never took another solo patrol on Stillwater Lane, and sometimes, when the radio goes quiet, I can still hear that faint, rhythmic hiss, the sound of something ancient and hungry, pretending to cry. Story 2. The Weeping Engine at mile marker 81. The graveyard shift on a county highway is 99% boredom and 1% sheer, unexplainable terror. For 5 years, I'd mostly lived in the 99%. Then came the night I hit the 1%. I was patrolling the I-17, a lonely stretch of blacktop that cuts through a vast, empty expanse of the Arizona desert. The kind of place where the stars feel close enough to touch, and your own headlights are the only proof that the world still exists. The call came over the radio around 3 a.m. It wasn't from dispatch. It was a panicked trucker on an open channel. There's a car stopped in the middle of the northbound lane, near mile marker 81. No lights on. I almost hit it. Thing is, it sounds like it's crying. I radioed dispatch to let them know I was responding, though the crying part sounded like a classic case of a road-weary trucker's imagination. Still, a disabled vehicle in a live lane was a death trap. I hit my lights and accelerated, the strobes painting the desolate landscape in frantic flashes of red and blue. As I approached mile marker 81, I saw it, a vintage sedan, maybe a 70s model, a boat of a car, sitting perfectly straddling the two northbound lanes. Its paint was a dull, matte black, seeming to absorb the light from my strobes, rather than reflect it. No lights, no hazard flashes, just a dark, silent monolith on the asphalt. The trucker was gone, having wisely continued on his way. I pulled up behind it, angling my cruiser to create a partial roadblock, and hit it with my main spotlight. The car was in pristine condition, not a speck of dust or rust on it, which was bizarre for a vehicle of its age. The windows were tinted so dark they were practically opaque. I ran the plates. No record found. Standard, I got out of my cruiser, the dry desert wind whipping at my uniform. As I got closer, I heard it. The trucker wasn't crazy. It was a low, mournful sound, like a woman weeping softly, but it was mechanical. It was a muffled, rhythmic sob that seemed to be coming from the engine block itself. The sound vibrated through the soles of my boots, a deep, sorrowful thrum that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. "Hello," I called out, my hand on my weapon. "Is anyone in there? This is the state police. You need to move your vehicle." There was no reply. The weeping continued unabated. I approached the driver's side door. my flashlight beam trying in vain to pierce the tinted window. I couldn't see a thing. I rapped my knuckles on the glass. Police, open the door. The weeping stopped. The sudden silence was somehow more terrifying than the sound had been. I held my breath, listening. A slow, deliberate click echoed from inside as the door lock disengaged. My heart hammered. Was the occupant injured, unresponsive? I cautiously tried the handle. The door swung open with a smooth, silent motion. The interior of the car was as immaculate as the exterior. Black leather seats, a polished dashboard, and it was completely empty. No driver, no passengers, no keys in the ignition. There was no one here. I swept my flashlight across the empty seats, my mind racing. A prank, a stolen car left as a joke. But that didn't explain the weeping sound or the unlocked door. I leaned in, a cold dread washing over me. The air inside the car was frigid, carrying a faint metallic scent, like old blood and ozone. There was something carved into the leather of the driver's seat. It was a single, crudely etched word, hungry. I recoiled, pulling my head out of the car. That's when all the doors, all at once, slammed shut with a concussive boom that echoed across the desert. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my weapon. I was locked out. Then the weeping started again, but it was different now. It wasn't sorrowful. It was a guttural, angry sobbing, the sound of a predator feigning injury. And it was getting louder, the whole car beginning to vibrate with the intensity of the sound. My radio crackled to life. It was dispatch. Unit 28. We're getting a call from your radio. We can't make out what you're saying. It sounds like sobbing. My blood ran cold. I wasn't touching my radio. I looked at my shoulder mic. The transmit button wasn't pressed. I looked back at the black car. The weeping intensified, and through my own radio I could hear a distorted, mechanical mimicry of it. The car was broadcasting. It was using my frequency. Then the car's headlights snapped on, two beams of brilliant, piercing white light that pinned me in their glare. The engine roared to life, not the sound of a combustion engine, but a deep, organic shriek, a sound of raw, unadulterated rage. The tires spun, kicking up asphalt and smoke, and the car lurched forward, accelerating with impossible speed. It wasn't driving away from me. It was coming for me. I scrambled back towards my cruiser, drawing my weapon and firing 3 rounds into the windshield of the oncoming vehicle. The bullets sparked and ricocheted off the glass, as if it were armor-plated. The car didn't slow. The weeping shriek grew into a deafening roar. I dove behind my cruiser just as the black sedan plowed into its side with a sickening crunch of metal. The impact threw me to the ground. My head struck the pavement, and my vision swam. Dazed, I looked up to see the black car, its engine still screaming, pushing my patrol car sideways across the highway, as easily as if it were a child's toy. It ground my cruiser against the guardrail, sparks flying, metal groaning in protest. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The black car's engine cut out. The headlights died. It reversed slowly, disengaging from the wreckage of my cruiser, and sat silently in the middle of the road for a long moment. Then, with a final, soft, mechanical sob, it simply faded. It didn't drive away. It became transparent, like a heat haze, and then it was gone. I was left alone in the wreckage, with the smell of ozone in the air and the ghost of a weeping engine echoing in my ears. They found me an hour later, dazed and incoherent. They called it a hit and run, a phantom vehicle. They couldn't explain how my cruiser was totaled, or why my radio had broadcasted nothing but what sounded like a woman crying. But I knew it wasn't a car. It was a trap, a predator that haunts the loneliest roads, using a sound of sorrow to lure in the compassionate. And I know it's still out there, at mile marker 81, waiting in the darkness, weeping, and so very hungry. Story 3, Unit 734, in the Carver building. Of all the calls you can get on midnights, a silent alarm at the old Carver mannequins warehouse is the one that makes the hair on your arms stand up before you even leave the station. The Carver building was a 4-story brick monolith in the city's abandoned industrial sector. A place where the streetlights had burned out years ago, and the only sounds were the wind whistling through broken windows. It had been shuttered since the 70s, but the owner, some eccentric old trust fund kid, kept the power on and the alarm system active. We got calls there a few times a year. Usually, it was just a rat tripping a motion sensor. This time was different. I was the only unit close enough to respond. I pulled up to the massive chain-link fence, cut the lock as per protocol, and drove my cruiser into the sprawling, cracked asphalt parking lot. The building loomed over me, a dark shape against a starless, light-polluted sky. The alarm was silent, but a single, grimy window on the 3rd floor was lit with a faint, flickering amber glow. I went in through a side maintenance door, my boots crunching on broken glass. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust, decay, and a faint, cloying scent of old plastic. My flashlight beam cut a nervous path through the cavernous ground floor. It was a forest of silent, motionless figures, hundreds of them, mannequins in every shape and size, some fully assembled, some just torsos on stands, some just a pile of dismembered limbs. They were all turned away from me, facing the far wall, as if in silent prayer. The flickering light was coming from upstairs. I keyed my radio, my voice a low murmur. "Dispatch, I'm inside," making my way to the 3rd floor. Place is quiet. The last part was an understatement. The silence was heavy, oppressive. The stairs were metal, and my footsteps echoed unnervingly through the vast space. The 2nd floor was more of the same, an army of plastic figures, all facing away. As I reached the 3rd floor, the amber light grew stronger, casting long, dancing shadows. The light was coming from a large showroom at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. I pushed it open and froze. This room was different. B in the center. A single bare bulb flickered erratically, the source of the light. But it wasn't the light that held me captive. It was the mannequins. There were about 24 of them in this room, arranged in a large inward-facing circle. And in the very center of that circle was a single, freshly assembled mannequin. It was a police officer, my exact height, my build, wearing a uniform identical to mine, right down to the unit number on the shoulder patch, 734. I felt a wave of nausea. This was a prank, a sick, elaborate prank. Someone had broken in, set this up. Police, anyone in here? Show yourself now, I yelled, my voice cracking. The only response was the frantic buzz and flicker of the light bulb. I cautiously approached the circle. The mannequins were all standard, blank-faced models, except for the one in the center. It had no face. The head was a smooth, featureless ovoid of polished white plastic. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the name tag on its chest. It was blank. I looked closer at the uniform. It was real. Real fabric, real patches, a real duty belt with a plastic molded replica of my sidearm. Where did they get this? That's when the light bulb went out, plunging the room into absolute darkness. My heart seized. I fumbled for my flashlight, my thumb slipping on the switch. I could hear a sound in the dark, a soft, wet scraping sound. The sound of plastic dragging on concrete. It was coming from the circle. My flashlight flickered on, and I aimed it at the center. The cop mannequin was gone. The space in the middle of the circle was empty. Dispatch. I have an intruder, 3rd floor. I whispered into my radio, backing away towards the door. Possible 10 to 31 in progress. The scraping sound came again, closer this time, from my left. I swung the beam. A mannequin that had been part of the circle was now standing a few feet away from its original position. Its head was slowly, jerkily turning to face me. My blood ran cold. Then, from my right, another scrape. Another mannequin had moved. They were closing the circle on me. I backed out of the room, not taking my eyes off the shuffling figures. I slammed the door shut and sprinted down the hallway, my mind screaming. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't human. I fumbled for the stairwell door, my hands shaking. I glanced over my shoulder. At the far end of the hall, a figure was standing. The cop mannequin. It was just standing there, its featureless head tilted to one side. As I watched, a thin black line appeared on its face, splitting it vertically. The line widened, cracking open with a sound like snapping plastic. It was forming a mouth. I didn't wait to see what came next. I bolted down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The sounds of scraping and shuffling echoed from the 3rd floor, growing in number. It sounded like an army was on the move. I reached the ground floor and ran for the exit, weaving through the maze of silent, watching figures. I burst out into the cold night air, gasping, my lungs burning. I didn't stop until I was inside my cruiser, locking the doors. I looked back at the warehouse. The faint amber light was gone from the 3rd floor window. In its place, standing perfectly still, was the silhouette of a police officer. My silhouette. It raised a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. Backup arrived 10 minutes later. They found the warehouse exactly as I had left it, on the ground floor, quiet, still, and filled with mannequins facing the wall. They found the showroom on the 3rd floor, but the circle was gone. The mannequins were scattered randomly. There was no cop mannequin. They found nothing. They called it a stress-induced hallucination, a trick of the mind in a creepy place. But they couldn't explain one thing. On the blank name tag of one of the mannequins in the showroom, someone had scratched a single word, my last name. I transferred out of that precinct the next week. I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that warehouse had seen me, studied me, and made a copy. And I knew with a certainty that chills me to this day that its blank, featureless face was no longer empty. It was waiting for the day it could step outside and become Unit 734 for real. Story 4. Evidence tag 11 to 38. The Blackwood Mirror, the safest place in the world, is supposed to be a police station. It's a fortress of concrete and steel, filled with armed officers. But I learned that some evidence never stops being active. Some things you can put in a bag and seal in a locker, but you can't ever truly contain them. I was working a late-night shift as the desk sergeant, which mostly meant mountains of paperwork and keeping an eye on the drunk tank. Around 4 a.m., the silence was so thick you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. That's when I heard a faint sound coming from the back, from the direction of the evidence locker. It was a soft, melodic tune, like a child's music box. I figured it was my mind playing tricks on me, but it persisted. A delicate, tinkling melody that was completely out of place in the sterile environment of a police station. Annoyed and a little unnerved, I went to check it out. The evidence room was a climate-controlled vault with rows of steel shelving, each crammed with sealed bags and boxes, a library of the city's misery. The music was definitely coming from inside. I pinpointed the source to a large, sealed evidence locker, locker 11 to 38. The tag on the outside was for an old, cold case, the Blackwood case, a family of 4 who vanished from their home a decade ago. No bodies, no suspects, no signs of a struggle. They just ceased to exist. The only piece of evidence recovered from the otherwise empty house was a large, ornate, antique mirror with a blackened silver frame. That was what was in the locker. The music was coming from the mirror. I pressed my ear against the cold steel of the locker door. The tune was clearer now, a haunting, familiar lullaby. It was "Hush, Little Baby." There was no logical explanation. The mirror was just a mirror. It had no mechanical parts, yet the sound was undeniable. My curiosity got the better of my judgment. I used the master key to open the locker. Inside, the mirror was shrouded in a thick evidence bag. As soon as the door was open, the music stopped. Silence returned. I told myself it must have been a sound from the vents, an auditory illusion. But I had to be sure. I carefully lifted the mirror out. It was heavier than it looked, and the frame was cold, unnaturally so, like a piece of ice. I set it on the processing table and, against every regulation in the book, I unsealed the bag and pulled the shroud off. The mirror's surface was dark, almost like black glass, and it didn't reflect the harsh, fluorescent lights of the room properly. The reflection it cast was dim, muted, and distorted at the edges, as if I were looking into a pool of still, black water. I stared at my own reflections. I looked tired, my uniform slightly rumpled, but as I watched, my reflection blinked. I hadn't. I stood frozen, my heart starting to pound. My reflection smiled, a wide, slow, unnatural grin. I wasn't smiling. I stumbled back, my hand reaching for my radio. This was impossible, a hallucination. I was sleep-deprived. I looked back at the mirror. My reflection was normal again, just a tired cop staring back with wide, fearful eyes. But the room reflected behind him. It was different. In the reflection, the evidence locker I had just opened was closed and locked. The shelves were subtly different, items arranged in a slightly altered order. And standing in the reflection, just behind my shoulder, was a little girl in a white dress, holding a teddy bear. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She was pale, with large, dark eyes, and she was staring directly at me. I spun around. The room was empty. There was no one there. I looked back at the mirror. She was still there in the reflection, standing right behind my reflected self. She raised a small hand and pressed it against the glass from the inside. My blood ran cold. This was Emily Blackwood, the youngest daughter from the vanished family. I recognized her from the case file photos. The lullaby started again, soft and clear, coming from the girl in the mirror. She opened her mouth, but it was the music box melody that came out. Her eyes never left mine, and they were filled with a terrible, ancient sadness. Then my reflection moved on its own. It turned its head slowly to look at the little girl. It reached out and put a comforting hand on her shoulder. The reflection of me then looked back at Mitha, real Mjand. Its expression was no longer my own. It was one of cold, possessive triumph. It raised its other hand and pressed its palm against the glass, perfectly mirroring the little girl's. "It's not a window," a voice whispered in my ear. I spun around, weapon drawn. The room was still empty. The voice had been in my own head. "It's a cage." I looked back at the mirror. The reflection of the room was darkening, the details fading into shadow. The only things clearly visible were my doppelganger and the little girl, and behind them other figures were beginning to emerge from the gloom. The rest of the Blackwood family, they weren't ghosts, they were prisoners, and my reflection was their warden. I finally understood. The mirror didn't show you ghosts. It showed you a copy of the world, a slightly different one, where it had trapped the souls of those who stared into it for too long. The Blackwood family hadn't vanished. They'd been taken, and now it had a copy of me. My reflection's triumphant smile widened. It mouthed a single, silent word at me through the glass. Soon, by. Through the shroud back over the mirror, the fabric feeling flimsy and useless against the horror it contained. I sealed it, put it back in the locker, and slammed the door shut, locking it tight. The music stopped. I never told anyone what happened. Who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy, that I'd finally cracked under the pressure of the job. But I know what I saw. I know that somewhere in a dark, reflected version of my own station, a copy of me is standing guard over a family of lost souls, waiting. I don't look in mirrors anymore. I can't, because I'm terrified that one day I'll blink, and the man staring back at me won't, and I'll know my cage is ready. Story 5. Dead Air on Ridgeback Mountain. Every rookie learns the first rule of the mountain patrol. Do unlisten to the dead air on the radio. Up on Ridgeback Mountain, where the logging roads are treacherous and cell service is a myth, your radio is your only lifeline. But there are dead spots, whole channels that are nothing but static. The old-timers tell you to stay off them. They say that sometimes the static talks back. I thought it was just a spooky story to haze the new guys. I was wrong. I was on a solo patrol, a routine check of the abandoned ranger station at the peak of Ridgeback. It was a cold, clear November night, the kind where the silence is so deep it has a sound of its own. My cruiser's engine was a low rumble against the immense quiet of the ancient forest. About halfway up the winding road, my radio started acting up. The main channel was fading in and out, lost in a sea of static. Frustrated, I started cycling through the channels, looking for a clearer signal to check in with dispatch. I landed on channel 13. It was supposed to be a dead channel, reserved for emergency services and never used. It was pure, hissing static. I was about to switch off it when I heard it, a voice buried deep in the hiss. Anyone copy? This is Unit 14. Request backup. The voice was weak, broken up by static, but it was unmistakably a cop's voice, calm under pressure. My heart jumped. Unit 14. That call sign hadn't been used in 20 years. Not since Deputy Frank Miller and his cruiser vanished without a trace somewhere on this very mountain. They'd searched for months, but never found him, his car, or any sign of foul play. He just disappeared. I grabbed my mic. This is Unit 28. I copy. What is your location? Unit 14. The static hissed for a long moment. Then the voice returned, a little clearer. Old logging road, off the main path. He's still here, watching. Please, hurry. My blood ran cold. Was this a recording? Some kind of freak atmospheric event, causing a radio echo from 2 decades ago? Or was Frank Miller somehow alive, trapped all this time? I had to find out. Stay on the line. 14. I'm on my way, I said, my voice tight. I turned the cruiser onto a barely visible, overgrown logging road, the one mentioned in Miller's old case file as his last known route. The branches of ancient pines scraped against the sides of the car, their needles whispering against the glass. The voice on the radio guided me. Keep coming. past the old oak that looks like a hand. Take the left fork. Every detail was perfect. The landmarks were exactly as described in the reports I'd studied as a rookie. I passed the gnarled oak, its branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. I took the left fork, the road deteriorating into a muddy track. The air grew heavy, and a thick fog began to roll in, swallowing my headlights. "I'm getting close, Frank," I said, using his name without thinking. "Just hang on." The voice came back, but something about it had changed. It was smoother, less broken by static, and it had an odd, melodic quality. "Almost here. So close. We've been waiting for so long." "We," a chill crawled up my spine. "We, Frank, who's with you?" The radio was silent for a moment, except for the low hiss. Then the voice spoke again, but it wasn't Frank's voice anymore. It was a perfect mimicry of my own. "This is Unit 28. I copy. What is your location, Unit 14? I slammed on the brakes, the cruiser skidding in the mud. My blood turned to ice. It was playing back my own transmission. This wasn't a rescue. It was a lure. The voice continued, shifting, morphing. It became the voice of my dispatcher, then my captain, then my wife. Each one perfectly mimicked, each one calling me deeper into the woods. "Come on, honey, just a little further. It's safe here." I threw the cruiser into reverse, my heart hammering against my ribs. But the muddy road betrayed me. The tires spun uselessly, digging themselves deeper into the muck. I was stuck. The radio fell silent. The engine of my cruiser sputtered and died. I was plunged into absolute terrifying silence, trapped in a coffin of steel and glass, surrounded by an impenetrable fog. Then I heard a new sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the roof of the cruiser. Tap, tap, tap. I looked up, but saw nothing but the fog pressing against the windshield. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. Then it moved to the driver's side window. Tap, 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 right next to my head. I drew my weapon, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I refused to look. I just stared straight ahead into the white abyss of the fog. A voice whispered right outside the glass. It wasn't coming from the radio now. It was real, and it was a chorus of all the voices it had mimicked, all speaking in unison. "Let us in. It's cold out here." Then I saw it, a shape pressing against the fogged-up window. Not a hand. It was too long, with too many joints. It was pale and thin, like a bleached branch, and it tapped, tapped, tapped against the glass with a single sharp talon. I didn't scream. I couldn't. All I could do was sit there, frozen in terror, as more shapes began to coalesce out of the fog surrounding the cruiser. Tall, impossibly thin figures moving with a silent, fluid grace. They had no faces, just smooth, pale heads that tilted and twitched as they inspected their catch. And from them I could hear a low, chittering whisper collage of every radio transmission they had ever ensnared. A ghost chorus of lost voices. I don't know how long I sat there, trapped. It felt like an eternity. But as the first faint hint of dawn began to break, tinting the fog a pale gray, they simply faded. They dissolved back into the mist, and the fog itself slowly receded, as if it were a curtain being drawn back. I was alone. I got the cruiser started and managed to get it out of the mud. I never looked back. I reported that I'd gotten stuck and my radio had malfunctioned. They never believed my full story, but the old-timers knew. They just nodded, their eyes filled with a grim understanding. I know what happened to Deputy Frank Miller. He answered the call. He followed the voice, and he joined the chorus. I was lucky. I got stuck. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving those lonely roads, I still switch to Channel 13. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to myself it was real, and I listen to the dead air. And sometimes, buried deep in the static, I hear a new voice. A terrified cop calling for backup. A perfect mimicry of me. And I know the trap is set again.